welcome. Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming. My name's Alex Doherty, or just Doc. I work for Lenovo in our channel technical sales division focused on infrastructure. And I'm joined today by our field CTO, who I'm sure you all saw speak this morning, John Seth. Hey, John.
Hello.
Cool. So we had a couple sessions around the idea of managing, modernizing outdated infrastructure or workloads or your entire enterprise. We were also given a few different tracks. Some were more philosophical, more high-end, and others were a bit more tactical, and that's what this session is going to be about. So today I want to go through tips and tricks and just industry updates around technology and the things that Lenovo makes, manufactures, sells, and our partners as well, and how you can use some of these resources to either spend less money, get better performance, better experience, and hopefully make your lives easier and better. So that's the plan for today. As always, I will be asking questions, so feel free to chime in. We got a few roaming mics here, so any questions, comments, absolutely feel free to engage. As much as I love having everyone look at me for half an hour, we're here for you, not for me. So I always like kicking these things off with something kind of fun and funny, kind of set the stage. And I originally pulled this from a November 1984 Montreal Gazette for something I did last fall. What I find very interesting is that if you look on the left, these are news stories from 40 years ago. We have ethnic tensions in India. We have, Revenue Canada screwing up taxes with computers, and infrastructure crumbling in Quebec. So 40 years on, not a whole lot has changed over here. When we look at the right, this is from a local computer store. And if we just look at those prices and adjust for inflation, we're looking like a $5,000–6,000 desktop that's not a whole lot more powerful than a pocket calculator. And we just look at the amount of, computer with no RAM, a little bit of RAM. I mean, it's fun, I'm sure we all remember this, just things getting faster and faster and faster and obsolete by the minute. It's not so much the case anymore, especially around personal computing and our cell phones, with so much more going to the cloud and resolutions not getting any better and things not having to really get any faster. But if we bring this into the enterprise space, data center, cloud, hybrid cloud, pick your term, there's a lot of neat things we can do and a lot of developments in that space that can save you a lot of money. So overall today, we're going to be looking at tune-ups and trade-ins. I'm really big into cars, so I try to use these analogies as much as possible. And the big thing around managing and modernizing old tech is, of course, understanding what you have. What is running, what do you own, what do you pay for, what are you supporting, and what are you ultimately responsible for. And then we'll look at some ways you can analyze your spend and get a better idea of what dependencies you have, be it between different applications, different pieces of hardware, things you have on-prem that may connect into the cloud. Understanding where those links are and what the risk is if those chains break. Perhaps how we can consolidate, shorten the links between them, consolidate them wherever possible. We'll look at some alternatives, secondary, tertiary platforms you can use, either for the goal of renegotiating or just right-sizing or finding the correct place to have those workloads, be it on-prem or otherwise. Also look at some new technologies that are out there. I think most people here are in IT and probably do keep up to date on a lot of new technologies. But unless you're in it day in, day out, like someone in my role is, you can't see how quickly certain prices are coming down or going up or just becoming more and more powerful every generation, doing a whole lot more with less, especially if your exposure to these types of things is once every, say, 4 to 8 years when you go through a refresh or a required upgrade for one of your platforms or major softwares. Then we'll look at some ways you can right-size and reallocate. It could be rearranging or cloud repatriation or bringing things back on-prem or moving to the cloud. There's a lot of words for that. I like those too, pick your own. All brands use different terminology for that. And then we'll look at some ways to do the math and some of the calculations you can do. This morning we had more conversations around the overall risk and impact to business, including everything from HR and salaries and kind of developing talent pipelines over time. This is a lot more tactical, Excel-based, core count versus refresh versus hardware maintenance costs. And the last step should be profit, ideally. And if we have enough time left at the end, I do have some neat links and tools, which I have a QR code for that goes to a bunch of tabs pre-saved using a tool called OneTab, which will make sure you get up there because some of them are pretty fun. I know that right now we are up against a much more packed session called IT Asset Allocation. And the irony is not lost on me that the whole message here is spend less, but ultimately I do work for a computer company and we do want you to buy more, and so it's Quadbridge. And these things can coexist. That this isn't one way of saying spend way more money here and you'll get less. Every vendor, cloud, on-prem or otherwise, will promise that it will cost less money, while in fact it may cost more upfront. And trying to navigate that and finding the ways that works best for you, because no two companies are the same way no two people are. So I guess we talked about the first point is taking stock. I guess we call that inventory. It's understanding what is actually running, what exists either in your data center or in your fleet. Out of curiosity, what tools is everyone here using for either real-time or point-in-time or periodic asset inventory or assessments?
Shot.
Yeah.
Okay. No.
System Center. What are you guys using? Cloud Physics? Okay. What else are other folks using to do your day-to-day asset inventory management, asset inventory collection? NetSuite, okay. Okay.
We used to use Modernizing, but no longer.
Okay. Mix of different tools. Okay. So here's a hijack his presentation. Here's a question: are all of the tools that you've bought single-use tools? Always? Always. Okay. Just curious. We'll harp on the why in a minute, but go ahead.
Cool. It talks about our understanding what exists, what is online, what is visible either through a management network or any other way you plug it into a cloud, look at all your active VMs, etc. It's knowing what you have and what is running, and of course those all have expenses, everything from electricity to licenses, etc. But it's also what's actually being used. Not in terms of am I using yes or no, it's what's my overall capacity, how much RAM, how much storage, how many cores, how many gigahertz are in there. What am I actually using of those? What is my peak usage? What's my average? And what am I really using it for? I often, very, very often, part of my job is a customer has a 5, 6, 7-year-old environment they want to refresh. It's getting old and going into service. And we'll run one of these tools, which is on the next slide, I promise. And we'll look, and they'll have this incredible, robust, $500,000 data center they purchased, say around pre-pandemic. And we look, and they've never used more than 20% of it. You think, geez, that must have cost a lot of money. And maybe they've moved things off of it in the past, or there was a plan that never came to fruition. So there's a very good reason why it's not being utilized very much. But quite often, people buy things without really knowing the true capacity of them. And as technology goes on and on, what you can do with any core used to take 32, for instance. So it's understanding what your actual utilization is, and then when you're planning to purchase, buy around that, while accounting for growth, etc. But what's actually being used, and that's going to greatly reduce the price on the next refresh. Of course, how are things licensed and maintained? Per core licenses are pretty much the standard in all major enterprise software now, and that's where they'll get you. I know there are some minimum core counts. VMware recently changed. Windows is now minimum 16 cores. The point being, if you can do more with less, why not? And also, who's approving and paying for all these expenses? Is it all coming from central IT? Is it done departmentally? Is there any kind of chargeback mechanism? Do you have people kind of doing shadow IT or been given a corporate credit card that are, buying VMs that they aren't really using, or they've left on when they should have been turned off, or grossly over-provisioned, or costing, 2-3 times what they want, what they should, or what's actually required? Be paid by the hour, by the day, by the gig that's allocated. It's important to understand where all the money is being spent and what you have and what you really need versus what you pay for. There's no point buying a giant truck if you're never going to put more than a few grocery bags in it. If you're never going to pull a trailer larger than a certain amount, you don't have to buy that big truck, which is going to cost a lot of money up front to maintain and to fuel. It's the exact same thing in a data center. Of course, you also want to know what's the cost of doing nothing. Once you're saying, I'm happy, this thing still works, all this renew. How much is that actually going to cost in dollars? And what could that money have been spent on elsewhere? Either to develop new workloads, greater capacities, to train, to hire more people, or invest it elsewhere in the business. And of course, the big question is, how much could you save by upgrading? And we'll look at some of the math a bit later on. The tool we wanted to mention, though, was OneIQ. OneIQ is, it's similar to a lab optics or cloud physics, one you've used from our competitors. What's a bit different here is that this runs an agent somewhere in your data center, and if you provide it the right access, it creates a shared workspace hosted in Canada. OneIQ is a Canadian company based out of Toronto, that the customer, your Quadridge representative, any contractors they may have, or vendors such as Lenovo can collaborate and view and run simulations all within this tool, which will also give you a great dependency tree to show you where things are connected within the environment on-prem and both in the cloud. And I think the neatest thing that it can do is it can provide you with estimated costs and actually do a very, very good job of consolidating older machines and cloud workloads onto a modern on-premise equivalent using the latest and greatest from Lenovo, typically around our Intel and AMD-based machines, both in more traditional 3-tier or compute with external storage, or on some of our hyper-converged or software-defined platforms. They can have your ROI and TCO calculators in there, what you'd pay full cloud, what you'd pay full on-prem. There's a good chance there's a reason why you want to go with a blend of that. And that can all be done within the tool. This is typically a rather expensive piece of software. Through partnership with Lenovo and Quadridge, we can provide a 30-day one and no charge to the customer. So I'd suggest getting with your Quadridge representative if you would like to run one of these. Of course, it's great. Our version of it will say, buy the Lenovo thing. But either way, there is this great value in understanding what is there, and it's everything from your utilization in terms of all of your main performance metrics, but we'll also provide a nice output of serial numbers, current warranty status, etc. So it's a really good value-added report, which can be used to inform decisions later on. Question from the backside.
What's the biggest difference between SolarWinds and OneIQ?
The biggest difference between SolarWinds and OneIQ. So SolarWinds is essentially infrastructure monitoring software. OneIQ is essentially a load validation tool. So it's a way to take a snapshot, a 30-day snapshot, but take a snapshot over 30 days and then actually give you 95th percentile utilization of what your real-world resources are, and then to predict if you were to modernize and go to VMware, Nutanix, Azure Local, or whatever your cloud tenant is, what would your cost be to do that modernization? So there's some AI built into it to do some of that load testing. Some of that performance analysis for you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Excellent. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, I just saw it published a couple days ago, so I wanted to share it out. It's the Quadridge IT Asset Deployment Assessment. And that's a professional service delivered by Quadridge, which I'm sure will do a lot of these things and probably delve into your other assets that aren't necessarily data center related. And I think they've got a few different options to go with that. So these services available from us, from them, and you can probably get a whole lot more value by combining the two. But I would highly recommend trying out a OneIQ assessment, whether you're looking to buy a new Lenovo data center solution or not. But I hope you do. On a timeline here, John, sorry. And I was mentioning earlier just around just how fast things are getting. And I like bringing up that old PC one from before, because computers used to go faster and faster every year. And now it just seems that they're all the same. This is my third new cell phone in 5 years, and quite frankly, it's the same thing in my mind. Photos are a bit nicer, battery lasts a bit longer, but it's all the same. But when we get down to the data center, it's incredible what new processors are doing, especially at the lower end of things. I understand that there's some SMB customers here, some globals as well. But I want to focus on a very, very typical solution that we see in that SMB, 100 to 300 employee space, and that's your traditional 3 servers in a SAN. It's not particularly exciting or sexy, but it's kind of the bread and butter of what a lot of the Canadian channel is. And then what I pulled out for fun, just going through some VMark and Passmark metrics, the new absolute base model, your Geo Metro of a processor, the 4510 Xeon, is just as powerful as one of the highest end golds from only about 5 years ago. uses way less power, half the number of sockets. But the real interesting part is that you can get about 57% less density, which also means 57% fewer cores to license. And depending on what software you're working with, be it through a Windows upgrade, a VMware renewal, especially in the higher tiered editions, that's a whole lot less to license. A lot less. So CPUs are the big one. There's also been AMD's claim to fame in the last few years, as we've seen them, gain huge amounts of market share, especially in those incredibly high core count CPUs. You can now get 192 cores in something about the size of a Triscuit, and we can put 2 of those in a 1U and liquid cool it without having to have any external HVAC or plumbing equipment through our Neptune hybrid cooling, which I didn't include on here. And if you look at some of the decks they've got, it's going from 1,000 servers down to 150. That may not apply, so I didn't want to mention it, but getting in that more 12 core down from a 28, I think that's a very realistic example of how much more powerful things are. And we're big enough too, because so many of these refreshes we've seen, customers said, well, I had 28 cores before, I want 28 cores again. I had a V8 Mustang in the 80s, I want a V8 one now. Well, how fast do you want to go? Because a Toyota Corolla goes that fast now. So it's decoupling the, I want that, I want this number, comparing that to what you actually have versus what's available on the market now. It is shocking. Really, really impressive what's happening in that space. I've got some cool pricing metrics around that later. Yes, John?
2 other things with that. The newer processors, if you're not familiar with the newer processors from Intel and AMD, they're on-chip accelerators, which means you're going to get higher density for the same amount of performance. You compare that to a 5-year-old CPU. That's one. The other thing is, if you're not familiar, Broadcom just came out and said the minimum amount of cores you can license is 72. So if you're not doing that math to get to, if you're a 3-node cluster, if you're not doing the math to hit 72 cores, you're wasting money. Think about those kind of licensing things, right? You could be putting in 3 dual 12-core boxes, or potentially
I really should have put 16. It's just, I had the price for that system.
Yeah,
It was a line.
right? So that's a really important thing to think about, is that licensing change and moving to the newer products. I guess, again, also newer Intel, newer AMD processors have co-processors on. There's things for encryption, there's things for database transactions, there are things for network performance. Those accelerators are going to give you increased performance per VM because they're not just running. Everybody here remembers SIMs, right? Streaming one execution, multiple things. That's what these new accelerators do. They're going to give you improved performance.
And the same goes for everything else inside the server. 25 gig Ethernet is pretty much the base model now. We still have 1 and 10 gig cards, but the 25 gig card costs the same as the 10. You have to upgrade the rest of the infrastructure. Of course, have the right cables and and switches to go with it. The point being is that you have, sorry, John?
You can run 25 gig and 10 with a 10 gig.
You can't. You have to take advantage of the 25 gig.
It doesn't take advantage, but it future-proofs you for 3 years out. So you have to upgrade your switches immediately.
This is true. But if you were aggregating 4 10 gig ports, you can now do it with 2 25s and actually still get a 20% bump, which means you've shrunk the amount. That's what a 60% give or take per port performance. And the other one too is NVMe storage. NVMe now per terabyte in our more SAN grade dual core enterprise class drives, NVMe costs less per terabyte than a traditional SAS SSD. They're about 4 times as fast in terms of raw performance. And aggregate performance and rated performance. However you look at it, they go 4 times as fast and they cost less. I remember doing the same conversation a few years ago when we launched our partnership with NetApp around our kind of entry-level block arrays, showing what you could do with Flash. 5 years ago, cost the same amount as doing it with hard drives 5 years prior to that, and now we're seeing it repeat itself with NVMe, and just the incredible performance you can get out of that. So things are going faster and they're getting less expensive. That's usually the case in IT, but these are just a few examples where you can really take advantage of them. Newer tech. In the next slide, we'll have direct examples with costs, and I priced them all out. And I gave QuadBridge a decent typical margin, so they won't get mad at me if anyone tries to get these prices after. It's just the price of on-prem storage, and we've had a few people mention that today, that bringing things back on, back on-prem is just way more cost-effective. Of course, it's nice to rent things. I'd love to rent a car all the time, but sometimes you want to own something, and keep it on-prem. Not only for data sovereignty and control of it, if that's an issue, or security, depending on what type of data is being stored on there. But quite often the performance is incredible what you can do on-prem. And quite literally, we're looking at about 1/10 the price per terabyte, and that's after you take things like warranty and installation, and all of your rating and everything. This is not just taking raw drives and dividing it by the number. This is using industry standard number of hot spares and redundancy settings to protect the data. And that's from one array, and we'll look at some examples on the next slide around perhaps a more realistic deployment with local and perhaps even two-site redundancy between them.
So real quick, one metric to be thinking of is watt dollar per unit of work. How much watts does it take to do a single unit of work? What does that unit of work cost from a dollar per transaction perspective? And that's the way to be thinking about these new storage platforms, these new CPUs.
So to build on that kind of older typical SMB cluster, this is one I pulled out. This is a real one we did, not with QuadBridge, but these are Canadian dollars as well. Very, very typical. Dual 16 cores, 768 gigs of RAM, 10 gig networking, and 25 terabyte usable, all flash SAN. Back in 2020, just before the pandemic actually, no comment on it afterwards, but it was 85,000 Canadian, which adjusted for inflation is 100,000 now. Today, if you want to have equal performance, so if you're not maxing this out and you don't see yourself doing that, if you were to go with something that has the same horsepower, you can now do that with, again, those 3 12-core processors, 1 per box. That's only 36 cores a license versus 96. Yes, of course, you do want to hit those minimum thresholds. There's no point in buying those licenses if you're not going to use them all. Try to hit those minimums. Why not? But you can also get 4 times the storage performance, 2.5 times the bandwidth, and it costs less money. And that's just for the hardware. But when we start factoring in, it's your Windows data center licenses likely, and your VMware licenses, and any other industry-specific software applications you may have that are also licensed by Core or by Socket. That's where the huge amounts of savings are. So try to keep in mind of it's not just the amount of hardware, it's those licenses and how much faster each of those cores is and what they can bring in. And some people mention the cost of cloud storage today and how it's expensive, or all things on cloud being expensive, and bringing it back in-house. It seems like every couple of years we go back and forth between what's the best and the promise of all cloud or no cloud, some cloud. The answer is probably both. So again, I went and did some pricing exercises last night. If you were to get one of our big boy arrays, 4U, 60 drives, 22 terabytes each, decent amount of cache on the controller, when you've got them all fully protected, wearing 2 helmets and elbow pads, 14 airbags in the car, as it were, with our absolute top tier support, a very realistic 50/50 read-write, 64K block sequential read-writes, you're getting 4 gigabytes per second, which is pretty fast. That typically aligns to one of the higher tiers of cloud storage, but I figured since this will likely be on the lower end, perhaps archival, backup, really use file servers, etc., I compared it to the lower ones for pricing. 65,000 IOPS, still pretty good. You're looking at 94,000 Canadian for that box up front. But what's interesting is that we look at that as a per terabyte per month over 5 years. Even if you throw the thing out afterwards, you're looking at $1.56 per terabyte per month for your storage that is protected. Now, if you wanted to get intense with it and you wanted to add your synchronizing licenses on it and either have those in 2 separate colos, 2 facilities, 1 on-prem, 1 in a colo, 1 in Toronto, 1 in Montreal, 1 North America, 1 Europe, with your mirroring licenses on there, you're looking at $3.33 Canadian per terabyte per month, fully protected. Which is pretty good because on AWS, you're looking at about $16 for that, 5 minutes. All right, and on Azure, you're looking at about 10. So you're anywhere from about 1/10 to about 1/3 the cost. Now, 1 petabyte is a lot of information, but people here have video data. If you're in the video effects or film industry, that's one place you may have that amount of storage. Or yes, sir.
Is this like raw data? Like the balance? It's usable.
It's usable.
Usable, right?
So in that array actually has about 1.25 raw. So yes. So it can be done. These are practical examples, and using tools like OneIQ and working with your Quad Bridge reps who can work with our entire local team, we can put these things up quite easily and quickly. These are the kind of things we're trying to make easier for you. I've got 5 minutes left, so we do got to get scooting a bit. The other one is, right sizing and rearranging. Do all users really need that thing? Does everyone need the top tier access, the top tier license? We see this a lot, especially in like graphical VDI. They just buy everyone the top tier 4 monitor license, but they're only using 2. They could maybe downgrade to VPC. Do they need the enterprise edition of something when the basic version could work? Do they need that much capacity? How much old crap is in there? Is it being deduped? Is it being looked at? Is it being flushed out? What's the data management policy about keeping older files, older content on your primary storage or on their laptops or backed up into their OneDrive, which requires their higher O365 tier? Do you need all the features? All the bells and whistles? How much are you spending on cloud services? Is it all being tracked? Who's in charge of it? Is everything being turned off when it's not being used anymore? Can workloads be migrated to and from the cloud based on seasonality? Or perhaps project-based, when you need more or less? How are things protected? Can they be recovered as fast as you want? Are you looking at things like Azure Site Recovery? Anyone using Azure Site Recovery here, by the way? It's a neat thing Microsoft does where you can essentially clone as many VMs as you like in the cloud. You pay for the storage all the time, but you don't pay for the VMs until you turn them on in a disaster scenario. You just pay a small retainer fee to keep them turned on. So instead of having a replica environment, be it on-prem or in the cloud, you can pay, I think it's 25 US per month to have that on instant ability. So you essentially get that second DR site when you need it. It's like setting a second car you only pay $10 a month for, and you only pay to drive it. That would be pretty handy. So there's a lot of neat tools out there. They're available, and I have links to them down at the end. We're going to be towards the end. The big question is, we talk about this a lot, is do you need what you're using right now? Do you need VMware? Are you already paying for something comparable? Like you have Windows Data Center, it includes a lot of the same software-defined functionality. Could you downgrade your tier? Are you exploring other platforms? It's a lot easier to negotiate with VMware if you're looking at Nutanix or looking at Azure Local. Migrating is not just a matter of cost of cores. That's one thing to consider, but are your people ready? Are your applications ready? Are there any dependencies that absolutely require it? Is there some kind of dependency gap of this version of VMware, this version of Windows, this version of the CPU that can't be broken? And eventually these things will wear out. Hard to do, you'll have to go to thrift stores to find that one part. The people that develop the software and understand how it works may retire, may no longer be alive. This is happening. Now that the software has been around 40, 50 years in some cases, especially niche industrial applications. What is the risk if those break? How much will they cost to replace? Are you ready? These are all things to consider. And we have about a minute left, so I will say, my last thing here is, look at what you're already paying for. There's a lot of neat tools built in you may not be aware of. Windows Data Center essentially has the entire HCI stack built right into it. If you're already paying for vSAN or VCF, you may be able to use that as they've changed the amount of terabytes covered recently in the base software. You may have a secondary file server or file sharing platform you're using. OneDrive is fantastic. Teams has a lot of AI tools built right into it. Windows REFS on I think 2019 and up has a lot of advanced features like dedupe and compression already built into it. There's also using less costly alternative. Linux, if it doesn't have to have any Windows apps running on it. Look at open source alternatives. Look at tier 2 platforms like Scale, Proxmox, and others that I think a few of them have booths here today. For your old laptops, Chrome OS Flex, it's free. It ties into things that people are used to using. If you have temporary users coming in, why not? And also look at some of your vendor migration promotions. Right now, I know Nutanix, VMware, and Microsoft and Scale are offering some benefits, free services, paying off your old VMware contracts and things like that. They're not as hot as they were about a year ago when this was the big thing. But talk to them today. A lot of them will have tools and resources to help you migrate, to help you prepare for that, as well as even in some cases refactoring applications. AI in particular, going from a CUDA to say an Intel-based application. So I think it's pretty straightforward in terms of the calculations, what you want to do, what it's going to cost to maintain, taking out the whole human cost and risk cost aside, just in terms of pure core count. Pretty self-explanatory. A couple things I want you to know. We do, Lenovo has them, as well as all of our partners will have trade-in and resale programs, either just for destroying it safely and certified, to resell it for scrap metal, or if it's still a usable platform to eventually be resold, and we will give you money for it. You won't always get the best price, but it's money, and it's better than having to pay to recycle it. And also look at the different financial services options we have available, either through consumption-based, which Lenovo calls TrueScale, or through more traditional, CapEx, OpEx offerings from either Lenovo Financial Services or QuadBridge's financial partners, and perhaps look at what you can do internal chargebacks, so that IT is not entirely the responsibility of IT department, and find ways, a metric that you can use to charge internal departments for your time, your effort, your skills, and your equipment. Finally, some cool things to check out. I don't want to get the mood here. Lenovo has a number of demo and POC labs available. So if you have an application you want to run or you want to do some AI development, we absolutely have the resources, both hardware and people available. It's incredible what you can do with AI now. We've got a million fun stories. I think that would be the hot topic for cocktails this evening. You can also create a local LLM very easily and cheaply using a tool like GPT for All, just to put some of your internal documentation in to create a chatbot for be it new employees or seasoned employees alike. These things cost absolutely $0 to do. If you want to run a real fancy GPU before you invest in one, Valdi will rent GPUs by the hour with Windows desktops. Very, very easy to get into. I use that for a lot of personal stuff. Again, OneIQ, the tool we mentioned earlier, and Chrome OS Flex, which I'm a big fan of, and I'm installing on all of my family's computers so they stop calling me when they get a virus. There's a QR code that goes there. Yes, John, I know we're going to.
Real quick, we're about to get kicked out. Two things that I want you guys to think about. First is evaluate all your IT tools where you have duplication. If you have duplication, you should be looking at consolidation. That's why I asked if you're buying single-purpose tools. So for example, we have a partnership with a company called ReadyWorks. Take a look at it. It's an AI-driven platform that does multiple different things, from asset inventory to applications to passing multiple different solutions. A. B. The other thing is, if you don't have a unified control plane to manage everything, your people are wasting time moving back and forth through Windows. We have a partnership with a company called CloudVolt. Happy to talk about that with you guys. It is a way to simplify and automate to a single platform. Okay? It's vendor neutral. These are the kind of things to be thinking about. Don't buy a single-use tool. Buy something that lets you use it across the industry. That's the way to say it. I think they're kicking us out.